Hey, what's up guys, it's CalebBake01. Thank you for joining me again for another one of my random horror reviews. For today's episode is a movie I'm actually excited to talk about because in particular, I feel like this has been maybe one of the more misunderstood horror movies of the past couple of years. And when I say past couple of years, I think it only came out last year, 2021, so obviously a newer film as well. But as I was saying, I feel like when this movie first dropped, it caught a lot of people off guard and maybe wasn't exactly what they were expecting. But either way, in my opinion, I think this movie's pretty cool. So as I said, excited to talk about it. So today's flick is director James Wan's Malignant. Oh, sorry about the glare there. There we go. But Malignant is today's movie. And as usual with my random horror reviews, I will quickly go through the plot before we go into my thoughts on the film itself. But going into the plot today, I'm going to make sure I really tiptoe around things because one of the main talking points of this movie in particular is the twist. And I don't want to give it away for those who haven't seen this movie. And since this movie only came out last year, I feel like it could be really 50-50 on those who have seen this movie and those who haven't. But yeah, with that being said, it's going to be a very brief description, or I'm going to try and keep it brief, but here we go. So our lead, after an incident, she starts having these visions of these gruesome murders, and firstly, she doesn't know who's committing these murders, and she also doesn't know why she's starting to have these visions. She also feels like the person committing these murders is somehow involved in her life and is following her from a distance, so she's also very wary of that. But as the plot goes on, we start to unravel this mystery of who is committing these murders, why she is able to envision them so well, and this mystery starts to unravel as the film goes on. But as I said, I'm going to try and keep the plot very brief, so I'm going to leave it there. And let's get into my thoughts of James Wan's film, Malignant. So as I said in my intro, I feel like this is a movie that caught a lot of people off guard, myself included. Hearing the news before the release of this one that James Wan was returning to do a horror film, I had my expectations, something sort of along the lines of The Conjuring or Insidious, because that sort of seems to be the style of horror movies that James Wan likes to make of recent time, these paranormal, demonic style films. So those were sort of my expectations, and overall I think I was just sort of happy that James Wan was returning to do a horror flick, because he was coming off the back of doing these big Hollywood blockbuster franchise films. I think he did one of the Fast and the Furiouses. I know he did Aquaman, so those were the sort of films that he was doing at the time. I was just happy that he was coming back to horror. Other than my expectations, didn't really have anything else that I had heard about the movie. Malignant, I didn't even know what it meant. If I'm being completely honest, I still don't know what malignant means, but I was sort of going into this one a little bit blind. But if you've seen this movie, you know how completely batshit insane this fucking movie is. It is unlike anything that he's ever done in his catalogue before. If I had to compare it to something that he has done, I'd probably say Dead Silence, but if you've seen Dead Silence, take that with a grain of salt, because the only thing that sort of compares with these two is they've both got this level of camp. So with this movie, it is a throwback to those campy 80s horror films that James Wan would have been a fan of growing up, and that I'm a fan of even though I didn't grow up in the 80s. Who doesn't love an campy 80s horror film? And this is a throwback to that, and I feel like that's where what I was saying in the intro with this one being a bit misunderstood, I feel like that's where it comes into play. A lot of people probably checked out this movie and expected something along the lines of The Conjuring, something very serious, but you can tell that James Wan was just having fun with this movie. As I said, it has this level of camp. The acting is sometimes over the top. It has these scenes that are just straight from these old school sci-fi slasher. Like, it's a mixture of all these genres in this movie, but you can just tell how much fun and how much heart was put into this one, and that's what I love. Now, to continue on from a point I sort of started before, this movie sort of feels like a passion project for James Wan. As I said, he went and did his big Hollywood blockbuster, big franchise films that would have made him a lot of money. These movies would have just been paychecks for him. The cash would have been rolling in. And then I feel like once he finally had some time on his hands, he went, you know what? I'm going to put all that money that I made into something that I'm passionate about, a movie that I would have loved to see growing up, and that's how we got Malignant. Yes, this movie is campy. I know that's not going to click with a lot of people, but this movie is deliberately campy, and I feel like that's what a lot of people aren't understanding. This movie is just pure fun. He made it to have fun. Watching it, I will fully admit, there is plenty of things in this movie that do not make sense. But they don't need to make sense because he's just having fun. As I said, he's making his own little 80s campy horror throwback film made in modern time. He is making something, as I said, he is passionate about, that he is having fun with. Not a lot of things in this movie make sense. They don't need to make sense because it's just for the sake of having fun. You can look at this movie with a critical eye and nitpick things that are wrong with it, because you could do that all day. But as I said, I just feel like a lot of people are just not understanding this movie is deliberately over the top. It is deliberately campy. There are some goofy elements that if you're just sitting there with your arms crossed and not looking to have a good time, you can pick out tons of flaws in this movie. But at the end of the day, you need to understand this is deliberately campy. It's not to the point where it's spoofing horror movies or, it's a parody of anything. It is just purely fun, and I feel like a lot of people need to understand that. I don't want to shove it down people's throats, but as I said, I just feel like this has been one of the more misunderstood horror movies over the past couple of years. As I said before, this movie is a lot of fun, and you can find lots of enjoyment from this film. However, I would be lying if I said I loved this movie. I really, really like it. I find it highly rewatchable. This movie's sort of been honestly living in my head rent-free. I think back on this movie a lot more than what I probably should. However, as I said, I don't love this movie, but the weird thing is I can't specifically pinpoint the exact things that don't really click with me. I know for one, I feel like it does run a little bit too long in the tooth. I feel like the runtime could be cut down a bit. But otherwise, as I said, I find it really hard to pick out the exact things that don't click with me in this movie, and I know that is just the case sometimes. Not every movie is for everyone, but I just find it weird because everything I mentioned before, I love. I love the campiness of this movie. I love how some acting and dialogue is over the top. I love the throwback essence of like earlier films, the castle up on the hill with the lightning striking and the mad scientist angle and the mixture of subgenres thrown into this movie. I love all that. But just for me, I feel like there is just a little bit of something missing to stop it from taking it to the next level. So I do feel like I got all my talking points out of the way. I really just feel like this is maybe a misunderstood movie. A lot of people just would have went into this one expecting it to be a lot more straightforward and serious, and got this fun campy throwback, and a lot of people were maybe just too critical and had their grumpy arms crossed and, didn't take it for what it was, which is, as I said, a fun throwback to 80s style horror films. And I just wanted to get that out there because, as I said, I really do feel like this movie's misunderstood. If you maybe went into it and just it didn't click with you, maybe just go back and look at it from a new perspective, or maybe this could be a first time watch, and in that case I would recommend it because this movie is a lot of fun. I just really feel like not a lot of people clicked with the type of movie that James Wan was making. And honestly, I'm actually kind of excited for that new Megan movie coming out at the start of 2023. Megan, whatever it's called, that evil robot android, because it's produced by James Wan. It's not directed, but I feel like that movie is going to have the same sort of approach. It's going to be over the top, a little bit goofy, but it's going to be fun. So I'm actually kind of excited for Megan. But yeah, I definitely would put this on people's radar. So I'm going to give Malignant a 7.5. Yeah, it's just lots of fun, and as I said, I just feel like a lot of people may have looked at this one in the wrong way, so I just want to give it some praise that maybe a lot of people may have overlooked it for. So thank you guys for joining me for another episode of my random horror reviews. I had a lot of fun talking about Malignant, as I said, just purely because I feel like maybe not a lot of people looked at it the way I felt like this movie should have been looked at. Maybe purely because it is such a bizarre, crazy movie that was released to the mainstream. It still blows my mind that this was a mainstream, globally shown horror film. You know, this is the type of movie that I would have expected to see maybe, you know, in the indie circuit, just because the movie is that bizarre. But, you know, as I said, it makes me happy that it did actually get a pretty mainstream release, and it gives me hope for, as I said, movies coming out in the future like Megan, where, you know, it looks goofy, but it just puts the fun back in horror cinema, which I feel like there's a lot of just very serious horror films going on at the moment, and it's just good to know that there's directors out there just still trying to make horror movies that are fun. You know, as much as I do love serious horror films as well, it's nice to know that the mainstream can balance both. So, with all that being said, I'm getting off topic. This was a long video in the making. I actually recorded this review for Malignant a couple of days ago, but I got sick, and as I was editing it, I really didn't like how I was going. Like, I was just struggling for breath. So this is my second time doing it, but thank you for joining me again, guys. I appreciate everyone who is coming back to my videos, and everyone who is subscribing as well. I really appreciate it, guys. And hopefully I'll have some more content coming your way soon. I'm sure I will. But thank you for joining me again, guys. Peace.